The Bridge of Destiny. The storm, within thunder, crashed across the Seattle skyline as David Rivers pulled his jacket tighter around his sleeping daughter. 3-year-old Ruby nestled against his chest, her tiny fingers clutching his worn flannel shirt. The November rain fell like bullets, each drop stinging his face as he hurried across the steel bridge that connected downtown to his small apartment in the suburbs. David's work boots splashed through puddles as he quickened his pace. Another 12-hour shift at the construction site had left his muscles aching and his wallet barely heavier than when he'd started that morning. Ruby's daycare payment was due tomorrow, and the electricity bill sat unopened on his kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. The wind howled between the bridge's cables, carrying with it the scent of the ocean and something else. Desperation. That's when David saw her. Through the curtain of rain, a figure stood motionless on the outer ledge of the bridge. Even from 50 yards away, David could see she was young, probably in her 20s, with long, dark hair that whipped around her face, like silk ribbons in the storm. She wore what looked like an expensive evening dress, now soaked and clinging to her slender frame. His heart stopped. She was going to jump, the desperate leap. "Hey!" David shouted, breaking into a run despite Ruby's weight in his arms. "Wait! Don't do it!" The woman turned slightly, and even through the rain and distance, David caught a glimpse of her face. Beautiful, but hollow, like someone had drained all the light from her eyes. Her hands trembled as she gripped the railing. David's construction hardened. Legs pumped harder as he closed the distance. Ruby stirred in his arms, whimpering softly as the rain hit her face. He pressed her closer to his chest, using his body as a shield while his mind raced with a single thought. "Get there in time. Please," he called out again, now only 20 feet away. "Whatever it is, we can figure it out together." The woman looked at him fully now, her eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to care, hadn't expected anyone to notice. In that moment of hesitation, her foot slipped on the wet metal. She screamed as gravity claimed her, her fingers losing their grip on the railing. David lunged forward without thinking, his free hand shooting out like a lifeline. Their fingers connected just as she dropped, the impact nearly pulling him over the edge. Pain exploded through his shoulder as her full weight yanked against his grip. Ruby cried out, sensing the danger, her small hands fisting in David's shirt. With his daughter pressed between his body and the railing, David fought to maintain his hold on both of them. "I've got you," he gasped, rain streaming down his face. "I'm not letting go." The woman dangled in the darkness, her expensive heels lost to the churning water below. She looked up at him with shock and something else. Hope, maybe, or just the primal desire to live that exists in every human heart. "Pull me up," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. The rescue David's muscles screamed as he began the slow process of hauling her to safety. His right arm burned from supporting Ruby while his left fought to lift the stranger back over the railing. Every second felt like an eternity. "What's your name?" he asked, partly to keep her calm and partly to distract himself from the fire in his shoulder. "Sophia," she replied, her voice stronger now. "Sophia Sterling?" The name meant nothing to David in that moment. All that mattered was getting her back on solid ground. With a final surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, he managed to pull her over the railing and onto the bridge's walkway. They collapsed together in a heap, all three of them soaked and shaking. Ruby immediately crawled into David's lap, seeking comfort, while Sophia sat huddled against the railing, her arms wrapped around her knees. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." David studied her face in the dim glow of the streetlights. Even disheveled and crying, she was stunning, the kind of beautiful that belonged in magazines or movies, not on a bridge in Seattle during a thunderstorm. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said simply, adjusting Ruby in his arms. "Whatever brought you here tonight, it doesn't have to end this way." Sophia's eyes filled with fresh tears. When was the last time someone had shown her such kindness without wanting something in return? When was the last time someone had seen her as a person worth saving rather than a problem to be managed? The aftermath. They made their way to David's beat-up Honda Civic in the parking area, David insisting on driving Sophia wherever she needed to go. She gave him an address that made his eyebrows rise, the Penthouse district, where Seattle's elite lived in their ivory towers, during the 20-minute drive. Sophia remained mostly quiet, staring out the window at the city lights bleeding through the rain. Ruby had fallen back asleep in her car seat, exhausted by the night's events. "Can I ask what brought you to the bridge?" David ventured as they pulled up to a gleaming high-rise building. Sophia was quiet for so long that David thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "My father wants to marry me off to his business partner's son. It's all arranged, the engagement, the wedding, even where we'll honeymoon. I'm just a chess piece in his corporate games." David felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "That's not right. You should get to choose your own path." "Should," Sophia repeated with a bitter laugh. "When you're born into the Sterling family, should doesn't exist. Only must and will and because I said so." She turned to look at him, really look at him, taking in his kind eyes and genuine concern. "You saved my life tonight, David Rivers. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Just promise me you'll think twice before going back to that bridge," he said. "Whatever's waiting for you up there," he nodded toward the penthouse. "It's not worth throwing your life away." Sophia nodded, though they both knew it wasn't that simple. She climbed out of the car and ran through the rain toward the building's entrance, her evening dress trailing behind her like a broken dream. David watched until she disappeared inside, then drove home to his small apartment, carrying Ruby upstairs and tucking her into bed. As he changed out of his wet clothes, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman with the hollow eyes who'd almost given up on tomorrow. He fell asleep that night, hoping she'd find the strength to face whatever was waiting for her in that tower of glass and steel. 3 weeks later, David was on his lunch break, sharing a peanut butter sandwich with Ruby in the construction site's trailer when his phone buzzed. The text was from an unknown number. "Coffee? There's something I need to tell you. Sophia." His heart skipped a beat. He'd thought about her every day since the bridge, wondering if she was okay, if she'd found a way out of her father's plans. Now she was reaching out, and the simple message filled him with both hope and anxiety. They agreed to meet at a small cafe near the waterfront, the kind of place where nobody would expect to find the daughter of a billionaire. David left Ruby with his neighbor James and arrived 10 minutes early, nervous energy making it impossible to sit still. When Sophia walked in, David almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the elegant evening dress, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater that made her look like any other young woman grabbing coffee on a Saturday afternoon. But her eyes, those same deep brown eyes that had looked up at him from the edge of despair, were brighter now, filled with something that looked like determination. "David," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," he replied. "How are you doing?" "Really doing?" Sophia smiled, and it was genuine this time. "Better. Much better, actually. That night on the bridge, it changed something in me. Made me realize that I'd rather die as myself than live as someone else's puppet." She reached across the table and took his hand, her touch sending electricity up his arm. "I broke off the engagement. Told my father I wouldn't be his bargaining chip anymore." David's eyes widened. "What did he say?" "He disowned me," Sophia said matter-of-factly. "Cut off my trust fund, kicked me out of the penthouse, told me I was dead to him." She squeezed David's hand tighter. "And you know what? I've never felt more alive. Where are you staying? What are you doing for money?" Sophia laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I got a job waitressing at a diner downtown. Found a tiny studio apartment in Capitol Hill. It's not much, but it's mine. Every morning I wake up and remember that the choices I make are my own." David stared at her in amazement. This was not the broken woman he'd pulled from the bridge 3 weeks ago. This Sophia was radiant with newfound freedom, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive clothes or perfect makeup. "There's something else," Sophia said, her cheeks coloring slightly. "The reason I wanted to see you, that night, when you saved me, you didn't just pull me back from the edge of the bridge. You pulled me back from the edge of giving up entirely. You showed me what real kindness looks like, what it means when someone cares about you without wanting anything in return." David's heart was racing now, hope blooming in his chest like a flower reaching towards sunlight. "I know we barely know each other," Sophia continued, "and I know your life is complicated with Ruby and work and everything, but I was wondering, would you maybe want to spend some time together? Get to know each other properly?" David's smile could have powered the entire city. "I'd like that very much." And as Seattle's famous drizzle began to fall outside the cafe windows, David Rivers and Sophia Sterling started the most important conversation of their lives, not as a construction worker and an heiress, not as a single father and a runaway daughter, but simply as two people who had found something precious in each other's company. The bridge had brought them together in darkness and storm. Now, in the warm glow of the coffee shop, they began to build something that would last long after the rain stopped falling. Love against all odds building. Something real over. The next 2 months, David and Sophia's relationship blossomed like flowers pushing through concrete. Their dates were simple but meaningful. Walks through Pike Place Market where Sophia marveled at the ordinary magic of buying fresh flowers with her own money. Picnics in Discovery Park where Ruby chased seagulls while they talked for hours about dreams and fears and the 1,000 small details that make up a life. Sophia proved to be a natural with Ruby, getting down on the floor to build block towers and listening with genuine interest to the 3-year-old's elaborate stories about her stuffed animals. David watched them together and felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't thought possible. "She's amazing," Sophia said one evening as they sat on David's small balcony, Ruby finally asleep in her room. "So smart and funny. You're doing an incredible job raising her." David reached for Sophia's hand, intertwining their fingers. "She loves you too. Asks about you every day when you're not here." Sophia leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of sawdust and aftershave that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "I never thought I could have this. A real family, real love. With Father, everything was always conditional, transactional." "What we have isn't a transaction," David murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "It's not something you earn or pay for. It just is." Sophia turned in his arms, looking up into his eyes. "I love you, David Rivers. I love your kindness and your strength, and the way you make me feel like I'm home." "I love you too," he whispered back. And when they kissed on that tiny balcony overlooking the Seattle skyline, the whole world seemed to shift into perfect alignment. The storm breaks their happiness lasted exactly 73 days. That's when the photographer found them. David was picking Ruby up from daycare on a Tuesday afternoon when he noticed the man with the expensive camera lurking across the street. Something about the way he held himself, alert and predatory, set off alarm bells in David's construction-trained mind. "Daddy, why is that man taking pictures of us?" Ruby asked as they walked to the car. David's blood ran cold. He quickly buckled Ruby into her car seat and drove home by a roundabout route, checking his mirrors the whole way. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The story broke 24 hours later across every gossip blog and tabloid in the city. Sterling heiress slumming with construction worker. The photos were invasive and cruel. David carrying Ruby, looking tired after a long day's work. Sophia laughing as she served coffee at the diner, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The three of them together at the park, looking like Any other family enjoying a sunny afternoon? David's phone started ringing at 6 a.m. and didn't stop. Reporters camped outside his apartment building, shouting questions whenever he tried to leave. Ruby was scared and confused by the chaos, clinging to David's leg whenever they had to run the gauntlet of cameras and microphones. Worse were the online comments, cruel speculation about David's motives, questioning whether he was using Sophia for money, whether he was even fit to raise a child. The attacks on his character cut deep, but what really broke his heart was seeing how it affected Ruby. "Daddy, why are those people saying mean things about us?" she asked one morning, her lower lip trembling. David knelt down to her level, his heart shattering as he tried to find words to explain the inexplicable cruelty of the world. Sometimes people say things that aren't true because they're confused or scared. But you know what's true, Ruby? That Daddy loves you, and Sophia loves you, and that's all that really matters. The confrontation Jonathan Sterling arrived at David's apartment building in a convoy of black SUVs like a military operation designed to intimidate. David wasn't surprised when the knock came at his door. He'd been expecting this confrontation ever since the photos hit the internet. Sterling was exactly what David had imagined. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than David made in 6 months. His eyes were the same brown as Sophia's, but cold and calculating where hers were warm and full of life. "Mr. Rivers," Sterling said, not waiting to be invited in, "I think we need to have a conversation." David stood his ground in the doorway, very aware of Ruby playing with her toys just behind him. "If you're here to threaten me, Mr. Sterling, you're wasting your time." Sterling's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "Threaten you? Mr. Rivers, I don't make threats. I make offers." He pulled out a leather portfolio and extracted a check, holding it out for David to see. The number of zeros made David's vision blur for a moment. $5 million, Sterling said matter-of-factly. "More money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes of construction work. All you have to do is walk away from my daughter." David stared at the check, his mind reeling. $5 million would solve every financial problem he'd ever had. Ruby's college fund, a real house with a yard where she could play, security for both of them that he'd never been able to provide. "And if I don't take it?" he asked quietly. Sterling's facade cracked slightly, revealing the ruthless businessman underneath. "Then I destroy you. I'll have my lawyers dig up every mistake you've ever made, every unpaid parking ticket, every time you were 5 minutes late picking up your daughter. I'll paint you as an unfit parent and have that little girl taken away from you so fast it'll make your head spin." Rage flared in David's chest, hot and immediate. "You stay away from my daughter." "Take the money, Mr. Rivers," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Walk away clean while you still can. Sophia will get over you. She always does. But if you force my hand, I promise you'll regret it." David looked at the check one more time, then back at Sterling's. "Cold eyes, get out of my home." Sterling's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? You heard me. Get out, and take your blood money with you." David stepped back and began to close the door. "I love your daughter, Mr. Sterling. Really love her, not because of who her father is or how much money she might inherit. I love her because she's kind and brave, and she makes my little girl laugh. If you can't understand that, then I feel sorry for you." Sterling's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Rivers. A very expensive mistake." "Maybe," David said. "But it's my mistake to make." He closed the door firmly and leaned against it, his hands shaking with adrenaline. In the living room, Ruby continued playing with her dolls, oblivious to the fact that their entire world had just been threatened. David's phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "My father just left. Whatever he offered you, please don't take it. I'm coming over." The choice. Sophia arrived 30 minutes later. Her eyes red from crying, but her jaw set with determination. She swept Ruby up in a fierce hug, then turned to David. "He offered you money, didn't he?" she said without preamble. David nodded. 5 million? Sophia's face crumpled. And you said no? Of course I said no. David pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Sophia, I would rather live in poverty with you than be rich without you. That man doesn't understand what we have because he's never felt anything real in his entire life. Sophia buried her face in his chest, her shoulders shaking with sobs. He's going to make our lives hell, David. He has the money and the power to destroy us both. Let him try, David said fiercely. We'll face whatever comes together. You, me, and Ruby. We're a family now. Families don't abandon each other when things get tough. Over the next weeks, Sterling made good on his threats. David was suddenly laid off from his construction job due to budget cuts. The apartment complex where they lived received anonymous complaints about noise and disturbances, leading to threats of eviction. Sophia's diner let her go, claiming that the media attention was bad for business. But for every door that Sterling slammed shut, another opened. David's construction crew, led by his foreman Mike, quit en masse and started their own company with David as a partner. Sophia found work at a community center teaching art classes to underprivileged kids. The neighbors in their building, far from being upset by the media circus, rallied around the small family, bringing casseroles and offering to babysit Ruby. You know what your father doesn't understand? David said one evening as they sat on their balcony, watching Ruby chase fireflies in the courtyard below. He thinks money is power, but real power comes from people who care about you, people who have your back when the world tries to knock you down. Sophia smiled, her hand finding his in the darkness. He's going to keep fighting us. Then we'll keep fighting back, David replied. Together. The resolution. The end came not with a bang, but with a whisper. Jonathan Sterling's private investigator, hired to dig up dirt on David, instead uncovered something that changed everything. The real story of the night Sarah, David's wife, had died. The fire that had claimed Sarah's life wasn't caused by faulty wiring, as the insurance company had claimed. It was started by faulty electrical work done by a company owned by one of Sterling's subsidiaries. Work that had been signed off on by inspectors who had been paid to look the other way. David knew none of this when Sterling appeared at his door for the second time. But the older man's demeanor was completely different. Gone was the arrogant businessman, replaced by someone who looked years older and infinitely more tired. Mr. Rivers, Sterling said quietly. May I come in? David studied his face, seeing something he hadn't expected. Shame. He stepped aside and let Sterling enter. Ruby was at a playdate, so the apartment was unusually quiet. Sterling sat heavily on David's second-hand couch, his expensive suit looking out of place against the worn fabric. I came to apologize, Sterling said, the words clearly difficult for him. And to tell you that all legal action against you has been dropped. The media attention will disappear as well. I have people who can make that happen. David remained standing, his arms crossed. What changed your mind? Sterling was quiet for a long moment. Do you know how your wife died, Mr. Rivers? The real reason? David's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? Sterling pulled out a thick folder and set it on the coffee table. The electrical work that caused the fire was done by one of my companies. Substandard materials, bribed inspectors, corners cut to save money. Your wife died because of my greed. The words hit David like a physical blow. He sank into his chair, staring at the folder as if it might bite him. I've spent the last week reading about you, Mr. Rivers, Sterling continued. Your service record as a firefighter, the medals you won for bravery, the families you saved. And then I learned that you quit the day after your wife's funeral, gave up everything to raise your daughter alone. Sterling's voice grew thick with emotion. I destroyed your family once through my negligence. I won't do it again through my pride. David opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were investigation Reports, financial records, and a personal check made out to him for $25 million. This won't bring her back, Sterling said softly. But it's what I owe you for what my company took from you. David stared at the check, his mind reeling. $25 million. Enough to never work again, to give Ruby every advantage in life, to build the kind of future Sarah had dreamed of for their family. I don't want your money, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Sterling looked genuinely surprised. Mr. Rivers. I want your daughter, David interrupted, meeting the older man's eyes. I want Sophia in my life, in Ruby's life, without you trying to tear us apart. I want your blessing, not your guilt money. For the first time since David had known him, Jonathan Sterling smiled. Really smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. You really love her, he said wonderingly. Not the Sterling name or the inheritance or the social connections. Just her. Just her, David confirmed. Sterling stood up, straightening his suit jacket. Then you have my blessing, Mr. Rivers, and my apology. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old man who forgot that love is the only thing that really matters. 6 months later, the wedding was small and perfect. They held it in Discovery Park, under the same trees where David and Sophia had shared their first real conversation about the future. Ruby served as flower girl, scattering rose petals with the serious concentration of someone given a very important job. Sophia wore a simple white dress she'd bought at a thrift shop and altered herself. David wore his best suit, still not expensive but clean and pressed. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to face whatever storms might come as a team. Jonathan Sterling sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face as he watched his daughter marry the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. Next to him sat David's construction crew, still covered in sawdust from a job site, their faces beaming with joy for their friend and boss. You may kiss the bride, the officiant said, and when David and Sophia's lips met, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Later, at the reception in the community center where Sophia taught art classes, Ruby climbed onto a chair and tapped her plastic cup with a spoon. I want to make a toast, she announced in her clear 3-year-old voice. The room fell silent, everyone turning to listen to the little girl who had stolen all their hearts. To Daddy and Sophia, Ruby said seriously. Thank you for showing me that families aren't just people who look like you. Families are people who love you no matter what. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. As the evening wound down and the last guests filtered out, David and Sophia sat on the steps of the community center, Ruby asleep in Sophia's lap. No regrets? David asked softly. Sophia looked at him, this man who had pulled her back from the edge of despair and shown her what real love looked like. Then she looked down at Ruby, the little girl who had accepted her completely from the very first day. None, she said firmly. This is exactly where I'm meant to be. David wrapped his arm around his wife and daughter, holding them close as Seattle's famous stars finally appeared through the clearing clouds. Somewhere across the city, a bridge stretched across dark waters, the same bridge where a broken woman had once stood on the edge of giving up. But that was yesterday's story. Tonight was about tomorrow, about the family they'd built from hope and determination, and the simple belief that love could conquer anything life threw at them. And as they sat together under the stars, David Rivers and Sophia Sterling Rivers knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning.